In this tutorial, we're going to look at how to create a SQL Server 2012 database and a table within that database using solely the SQL Server Management Studio GUI. To do that, we're going to have to open SQL Server Management Studio. In Windows 8, just click on the Start button and search for SQL Manage. It should be one of the first options that you get. Just click on that. And here, I'm just going to use the default instance to connect to SQL Server. But if you had an instance, let's say in a server on another machine that you wanted to connect to, you can just type in the server name. And as long as you've been provided the right credentials, you'll be able to log into it. But we're just going to connect to the default instance within my machine. And I'm going to use Windows authentication. Click connect, and on your left side you're going to see the Object Explorer window, and within my SQL Server instance I have a folder called databases, and if you expand that you'll see I have a list of all my databases, and I only have one right now, but we're going to want to create a new one. So right click on the database folder and select new database. And here, the only option we're going to provide is the database name. So I'm going to name my database TestDB. Then I'm going to click OK. Now you can see my new database. Now we're going to want to create a new table within our database. And if you expand the TestDB database, you'll have quite a lot of options here, and one of them being the tables folder. We're going to want to right click on the tables folder and click new table. And these other folders, we're going to talk about them in future videos, such as the views and stored procs. Okay, so now let's start adding some columns to our table. So the first column I want to add is a primary key, and that's just going to let me actually query the database and retrieve unique rows within my table. So I'm just going to name it ID, and I want it to be an int. And I don't want to have nulls, because being a primary key, you always want to have a value. With the primary key, you'd want to set it as a primary key. So right now it's not set as a primary key. So you come right here and you'll see this key icon, set primary key. I want to click that. So now it will behave as a primary key. We'll also want to do one more thing. Instead of having the user determine what the ID is, or the developer determine what the ID is, we're going to want to have SQL Server increment by itself. And so we're going to come down to the identity specification. We're going to say yes. And what this does, it gives you two properties, identity increment and identity seed. So what the identity increment means is every time I add a new row to this table, it's going to increment the ID by 1. So the first time I add a row, the ID will be 1. The second time it will be 2. Now let's create another column, and we'll just call it first name. I'll set this to an ncar, let's say 30. And that's just a character field. Then we'll also want to set last name, and let's remove spaces. we'll also set this to 30. I also don't want allow nulls because I want everybody to have a first name and last name. And I think this is good for a starter table. So let's go ahead and save this table. When you try to save it, it's going to ask you for a name. So this is where we can input our name. I'm going to name it users. And click OK. Now let's come back to our Object Explorer and right-click on tables and hit refresh. Then expand the tables, and now you see our users table. You can query the data of your table pretty easily just by right-clicking and then do select top 1000 rows. And this will query the table and provide you with all the values within the table. Well, the top 1000. If you want all of them, just remove the top 1000. Execute again. There's no data because we just created the table. So let's go ahead and add some data. So right click on the users table and hit edit top 200 rows. And here we can actually input new data. And remember we specified the ID column as an identity, so we're not going to provide a value for that. SQL Server will provide it for us. So I'm just going to say John Doe. And as you can see, SQL Server added the identity primary key of 1. And let's just add another. There again, SQL Server incremented the ID and set the primary key to 2. After we're done, you can just hit execute to make sure it's ready and close this window, and then come back to our query here and then hit the execute button again. And as you can see, we now have data. And so that's how you create a SQL Server database table and add some data using solely the SQL Server Management Studio